A History of Baltimore's Fells Point, 1670 to 1969. This presentation looks at the history and resilience of Fells Point. By looking at Fells Point's history and resilience, this presentation argues that while the historic neighborhood has been through numerous changes and challenges, it has adapted and stood up to them. Fells Point was settled as Long Island Point on land owned by John Howard in 1670. In 1698, landowner Thomas Cole took 550 acres of Mr. Howard's patent and named it Cole's Harbor. In 1726, the ambitious Fell family started arriving in Baltimore. They built a farm named Fells Prospect and took advantage of the area's location by building a shipyard. By establishing a shipyard, the Fell family established the industry that brought fame and prosperity to the area. For a while, Fells Point's name was spelled with an apostrophe. This is because the Fell family spelled their town's name with an apostrophe in legal documents. This practice was discontinued. At the time Fells Point was laid out, the neighborhood's layout, borders, and some street names were different. In 1773, the western border of Fells Point was the shore. By 1792, the official border was extended almost to Ann Street. Before the War of 1812 started, Fells Point was booming. Between 1800 and 1810, the number of residents and businesses in Fells Point grew from 736 to almost 1,200. Before 1812, there was little indication there would be a war with Great Britain. Nonetheless, all the businesses and residents in Fells Point were busy. The federal government knew that Baltimore's shipyards were ideal for having ships built and commissioned. When the United States declared war on Great Britain, Fells Point contributed to the Federal Navy by building ships called privateers. Additionally, residents enlisted in the Army. Fells Point saw numerous changes and events after the War of 1812. Its population continued to grow. Additionally, today's street layout was complete while street railways and railroads gradually came into the neighborhood between the 1830s and 1870s. Several prominent people lived in Fells Point during and after the War of 1812. The most prominent person was future abolitionist Frederick Douglass. He worked as a ship caulker at William Gardner's shipyard before escaping slavery in 1838. Over time, other industries supplanted shipping. By the mid-1850s, canning came to Fells Point. By the early 1900s, fertilizer plants came to the neighborhood. As eventually, Fells Point declined. In 1942, the last ship discharged its cargo. In 1950, The last shipbuilder in Fells Point closed. The decline of Fells Point was a harbinger of what was soon to come. The highway fight was Fells Point's biggest fight since the War of 1812. At the time, the neighborhood's buildings were not only in a state of disrepair, but Baltimore considered Fells Point a slum and proposed building a highway. Fells Point's residents and businesses, along with preservationists, stood in the way. They successfully fought to keep a highway from coming into the historic neighborhood in any way possible. One way to deter the city from building a highway through Fells Point was acquiring the historic neighborhood's buildings for restoration. Many entities joined the highway fight by restoring Fells Point's historic buildings. The fight over a highway in Fells Point attracted national attention. Several newspapers, including the New York Times and the Baltimore chapter of the American Institute of Architects, went on record as opposing the highway. Another way to keep a highway out of Fells Point was taking legal action that would delay the highway construction. The delay tactics worked. While Fells Point was facing its biggest fight since the War of 1812, work was being done to get the historic neighborhood designated a National Historic District. On April 10, 1969, Fells Point was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The restoration of the historic homes and conversion of larger buildings in Fells Point continued after the highway fight. One of the biggest buildings in Fells Point is the former Baltimore and Ohio Railroad tobacco warehouse at Henderson's Wharf. Today, this building is the inn at Henderson's Wharf. Fells Point's demographic makeup changed during and after the highway fight. Over the years, African Americans, people from rural Appalachia, and young families moved into the neighborhood. Since Fells Point's founding, it has had a strong resilience. That resilience was tested during the War of 1812, when Fells Point played a role in the war effort, and the highway fight, when residents, businesses, and preservationists stood up and successfully fought to keep a highway out of the historic neighborhood. The resilience that has been part of Fells Point's bedrock allowed the historic neighborhood to be a tourist attraction with hints of its past as a neighborhood that revolved around the maritime industry. Thank you.